Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from T.I. titled Paperwork. You know, the more I think about it, the more I'm still a little bit amazed at how long T.I. has managed to sustain his clout in the music industry and his presence even to today. Now, okay, sure, in the beginning he delivered some star-making records and proved instrumental in defining the trap scene in southern hip-hop, so when that came back, of course he was going to come back, playing off a dual persona that proved to be surprisingly versatile in sustaining his career. It helped that he had a lot of sleazy yet very easygoing charisma and charm, and an adaptable, elastic flow that bounced off strong, hook-driven production really quite well. Now, sure, lyrically, he came across as a bit of an asshole, but it was the sort of character that produced such catchy, bombastic music that nobody really cared, and along with Ludacris, he soon developed a very tight grip across southern hip-hop for most of the 2000s. But with the image and the lifestyle came legal troubles, and T.I. was soon stuck in the position of trying to fix up some of his image. He dropped his most pop-friendly album ever with Paper Trail in 2008, which proved to be one of his biggest in terms of his career, but was also really kind of uneven in terms of solid quality. After a stint in jail, he came back with No Mercy, which despite some standout tracks was even more uneven in terms of quality, and then he went back to jail. In retrospect, the problem seemed to be very simple. There wasn't a balance on these albums between T.I.'s personas, and whenever that balance kind of got skewed, the albums just seemed to work a lot less. So when T.I. came back near the end of 2012 with Trouble Man, Heavy as the Head, it seemed like a welcome return to form. Most of the production was back on point, T.I. sounded more invested in delivering quality wordplay than pretty much ever before, and he managed to wrangle together something of a cohesive sound that I did like. Sure, not all of the features turned out all that well, and his subject matter hadn't really evolved all that much, but it's not like I was expecting the subject matter to evolve from T.I. either. He has a specific lane that he runs in pretty well. But instead of following up that project with its planned sequels, T.I. looked to be even more ambitious, and with his new album Paperwork proclaimed that it'd be the beginning of a brand new trilogy. And look, as much as I like Trouble Man, not better than King or trap music, but it was still solid, I wasn't exactly enthused going into this release. Sure, I still hold that Paper Trail was a decent album, but did we really need a follow-up here? And when the singles like No Mediocre, where his protege Iggy Azalea was dropping more well-structured bars than T.I. was, I didn't know what to expect from the reportedly collaborator-overloaded album Paperwork. So did we get something of quality here, or did we get something of a regression? Well, honestly, I think we got some of both, because once again, T.I. has dropped another project that's overall pretty uneven. It's got some incredibly solid tracks that delivered exactly what you could expect from T.I. plus more, and as a T.I. fan, I really liked them, but it's also got songs that feel a lot sloppier than they really should. A lot of this album coasts by on attitude and swagger, and don't get me wrong, it's a huge chunk of T.I.'s overall appeal, but when you start diving deeper, what you find underneath some of these songs can feel, well, a little bit hit and miss, if I'm being honest. So okay, let's start with T.I. himself, and I'll be the first to say that while I do prefer his T.I. persona to his T.I.P. alter ego, at the end of the day, I just want to see T.I. go off with his aggressive flow, solid wordplay, and sheer raw charisma, because when T.I. can build to a solid flow, he can make his very immediate, in-your-face style of wordplay work without needing to be too complex. He works in that lane. He can deliver real substance, to be sure, but for the most part, it's all pure style, and there's some solid as hell songs on this album on that note alone, like the opening track, King, the Pharrell collaboration, Oh Yeah, or the explosive, boozy, badass collaboration, Jet Fuel. The thing is, though, is that T.I. can occasionally come across as lazy or sloppy when he doesn't push himself, which is the problem I had with both the singles on this album. Although, the real surprise when it came to his low energy was On Dough on Phil, featuring Trey the Truth dropping a pretty damn solid verse, all things considered, that easily outshined T.I., who was pretty much running on autopilot. Now granted, the production wasn't giving him a lot of help there, which proved to be a bit of a mixed bag all across this album. Now, T.I. said he was going for a very cinematic feel with this record, and really when he goes for those larger-than-life tracks, he tends to do really well, even if they do have a distinctive trap vibe, which I don't always like for luxury rap. But T.I. makes it work, because a song like King, it's all horns and organ and old-school gospel, and while also incredibly slick, he's got this sort of arrogant swagger to ride over this production perfectly. It's why explosive, propulsive tracks like New National Anthem featuring Skylar Grey, with the horns and the snare drums, the choir and bongos of Oh Yeah, the trumpets and hi-hats of Jet Fuel, the smooth, jazzy vibe of the thicker bass on About My Issue, the bells and the horns on Light 'Em Up, R.I.P. Dope B, to the symphonic vibe of Let Your Heart Go, Break My Soul. It's why these songs feel so well-balanced and potent, and dare I say it, cinematic. Yet when T.I. goes over lighter beats, he gets significantly less impressive results. The best is probably the title track, if only because it has a textured, old-school vibe that worked even despite Pharrell's less than impressive hook, or maybe G-Ship, thanks to the textured percussion, and Watch the Ducks howls on the chorus. But No Mediocre feels incredibly unimpressive, even despite that shimmering backing synth line courtesy of DJ Mustard. And that's before we get to songs like About That Money with Young Thug, which has this really thin organ tone for the melody and really needed slightly more abrasive trap percussion to really anchor this sort of song. Or Private Show with Chris Brown, that had a pretty solid spacious vibe and melody that is utterly squandered with a pitch-shifted voice over the entire track that completely kills any vibe for me. Or the absolute disaster of a song At Your Own Risk, which features this oily synth tune that has a borderline chiptune high synth and proves that Usher does not sound good at all over trap and drill inspired production. Hell, on that song, T.I. sounds incredibly lazy, so I don't think anybody could have sounded good over it. So on that note, T.I.'s guest stars don't exactly deliver stellar performances here either. Jeezy's verse is good enough, even though it only highlights the fact that he hasn't really evolved beyond the trap over the past decade, but the bigger highlights for me are from Boozy Badass's appearance on Jet Fuel, or Trey the Truth's grimier flow that does a lot better over that beat than T.I. does. Outside of that though, well, Iggy Azalea's verse is the best redeeming factor on No Mediocre, and I think I finally get why Young Thug is famous now thanks to some marginally creative wordplay on About the Money, but neither verse is good or memorable. As for the hooks, the easy standout is Watch the Ducks stand out in more rougher, more soulful delivery, because Pharrell's vocals often feel a little bit thin or even calculated to match with some of these songs. I'm a little surprised that for a song going for a political message about Black America, T.I. got Skylar Gray's pretty but not particularly distinctive vocals instead of something more soulful, especially considering you got Victoria Monet for 2 songs later on the album. Just a little bit of an odd choice there. But you know what? In the end, we need to circle back to lyrics and themes. T.I. has had some great wordplay over the course of his year and some fantastic bars, and a few of them do show up on this album. I might not be the biggest fan of his T.I.P. persona, but when he goes off on tracks like King and What Now and Jet Fuel, he makes the arrogance and aggression work through sheer bravado alone. I dug it. And what I've always liked about T.I. is, though his pictures might feel close to an established formula that we have heard before in luxury rap, he throws in enough details to set a very vivid scene, like on the pseudo origin story on the title track describing him and his uncle. But on his singles, he stumbles towards brand name luxury rap cliches way too quickly, and his sex songs like Private Room can raise their own questions, like why T.I. is telling the girl not to cry during sex, or why he's choking her. And that's not touching on the song Stay, where T.I. seems to be pleading with his wife to stay with him, but then there are lines like, you want to be right or you want to be with me, which almost comes across like a challenge. Though the tone of the instrumentation over the first verse, which sounds way darker than it really should. But you know what? I'll give it to him. He does sound sincere, and indeed that sincerity lends the more complex tracks on this album, the ones from a more T.I. perspective, a little bit more weight. Light 'Em Up is a solid anthem to a label mate of T.I.'s who was killed last year, and Let Your Heart Go is a surprisingly honest picture of T.I. now, admitting that selling drugs wasn't his overall dream, but simply a means for him to get free and get out of the trap. The song, though, that will get the most attention, however, is New National Anthem, mostly because it's T.I.'s version of the scathing indictment of gun culture in the United States. Now, unlike the Game's most recent attempt to tackle this issue on songs like The Purge, T.I.'s got a better focus, and he does a lot more in the song to get to the real issues, like mandatory minimum sentences, the drug war, and the message to work hard and get out of the trap and then help your friends and your family get out of it too. Because let's be honest here, it's not like the government or the police are going to step up and help. Now, it'd be very easy to point out T.I.'s hypocrisy about gun violence when there's significant chunks of this album in his career riddled with guns, and to be fair to T.I., he addresses that and his felonies. But T.I., dude, when you say, I ain't gave it to nobody that didn't deserve it, you're still acting outside the law here. Yeah, you might have been avoiding innocence, and you're only carrying weapons for self-defense as a product of your environment and the insanity of American gun culture. But look, the buck has to stop somewhere. There needs to be responsibility here. And when in the very same song he says he'll kill those who come after his clique, the non-violent message of the icons that he evokes feels a little bit undercut to me. Although, once again, to be fair, T.I. also highlights the same sort of racial profiling and the ability of police to avoid the consequences of the law that they're supposed to protect. So, you know what? I kind of understand why he feels justified. Even if the song is just for some plain, simple catharsis, there are some good underlying messages to it. So at the end of the day, what can you say about Paperwork by T.I.? Well, it's good, but it's a lot more uneven than it should be. I'll be honest, in the hands of a less charismatic rapper, this album would come across significantly weaker. T.I. makes up for a lot of it, because the wordplay on this album is not stellar. But the hooks are solid, and most of the production is great. That said, T.I. is capable of better rhymes and verses, or at least more interesting wordplay, and yet at the same time, for what this album is, it's pretty effective. So for all that, I'm thinking a very strong 6 out of 10. Definitely not T.I.'s best, but it'll certainly please some of his hardcore fan base. And and we can only hope that his follow-up to this supposed trilogy in the next 2 albums manages to add some more cohesion. But until then, go check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. So what do you guys think about some of this album more in detail and some of the more controversial tracks? Leave your comments. I'd be happy to hear more about that. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.